It's too damn complicated. Hi, this is Gary on manufacturing for another one of my podcast episodes that began all the way back in 2006. Thank you for tuning in. This podcast is brought to you with support from my longtime sponsor, Inductive Automation. Discover a whole new view with Ignition 8 and check out at inductiveautomation.com all the new items from their the latest release of Ignition 8. This software is packed with features for the modern control system like unlimited licensing, high-powered tags, a mobile-first flexible design environment for all devices. Ignition 8 supports enterprises of any size. See all Ignition has to offer at inductiveautomation.com. Thank you to Inductive Automation. And they're on a release cycle, like I'm starting to hear people doing like them, and starting to update rather than on a big chunk once a year or something like that, more incremental updates to keep things moving. Anyway, thank you to that sponsor, and also to ARC Advisory Group. You can find a link on my website, themanufacturingconnection.com, and check out all the details and register for their upcoming industry forum, postponed from February to June 6th, no, not 6th. I already looked this up and I've already forgotten. So June 6th through 10 this year, still in Orlando, same place, same times, different dates in June. Check out at arcweb.com or click on the link at my website. So the quote about complicated, actually it's not a direct quote, it's a paraphrase from a Procter & Gamble corporate engineer who gave the keynote address at the ODVA annual meeting held just this past week in San Diego. It's their business meeting and update meeting all in one. They elect new members to the board of directors, and I get reports from the executive director and the operations vice president, and from the technical committees and so on about what has been going on with the organization that supports the CIP, Common Industrial Protocol, and such networks that we know about as Ethernet/IP and DeviceNet, and other things that are companion to that. Anyway, it's a very busy 2 years. They met 2 years ago, just prior to the official closing of everything at the because of the pandemic. I was looking at my shirts, and I last attended 4 years ago. 2 years ago, I was moving at that time, and so I was packing boxes like crazy and didn't think I could leave my wife back home for the better part of a week to do all that packing and organizing while I was at some resort. Well, we won't even go there. Anyway, this was in San Diego last week. It was a great time. It was great for many people. It was the first time they had been out. I had been at another conference in December, but it's still great to see people that I haven't seen in 2-3 years and get an update. So like I said, the keynote, so the first part of my time there I sat in a couple of technical meetings, and then we had the big general meeting and annual business meeting on Thursday. And after business stuff and updates from the executive director, Paul spoke from Procter & Gamble Corporate Engineering. I used to live close to there, and I enjoyed going down occasionally and catching up with some of the engineers. Some engineers from the past, like Rob Alexa and Dave Chappell, and several other people that I've worked with over the years. They're very active in standards, and they do some really cool stuff. So Paul wanted to talk about investigating the latest stuff with Ethernet IP for process industries. And the big thing in process industries is something called APL, Advanced Physical Layer. And I'm not going to go into any technology on that in a podcast, but it is designed such that it's enticing for process automation and process applications. So P&G had in their lab north of Cincinnati have a cell. It's got several tanks and pumps and sensors and instruments and so on. And they did some work and they went out to a large number of vendors. So we want to investigate this. What can you send me that's Ethernet IP enabled process instrumentation and devices? And what can you send me that uses advanced physical layer of APL and so on? And they put together a test bed. And actually the thing pumps water, but they can set up batch process or continuous process. They can set up a batch and they could flow water into a tank ABC, do something through a pump and do some kind of thing. And then eventually all the 3 streams of water go back together in one tank and get pumped back again. A pretty cool little cell. And so they did that. And they tested all manner of things, switching to Ethernet and Ethernet IP specifically. And basically what they came back with is Ethernet works. And that may be a duh moment, but it's always good when somebody tests it and it's in a really good, blind, well, not blind, but a neutral test. But the problem got to be when you're setting up an Ethernet network, it gets complicated. You have IP addresses and device configuration were 2 of the biggest headaches. And just so happened I was sitting close to Steve Bagacki, who just, I knew him originally from Rock Automation as a vice president and various things, including marketing. And then he went to Belden and then he did some other things. And now he is the executive director of the FDT group. And the FDT group just released within the last couple of years, FDT3, and it does device descriptions and that sort of thing. But it's relatively new, and some of these standards organizations take a while to go through the committees and so on. And I mean, the work is amazingly painstaking at the bit level and that sort of thing. But anyway, that's 2 of the problems that P&G determined was ways to configure the IP addresses and other network configuration in Ethernet, and then especially device descriptions, being able to see a device in, for example, your HMI that's out somewhere else. So he asked for some help in finding ways to make it easier for the end user engineer when he releases that to all the different plants that Procter & Gamble have, of which there are myriad. He needs it so that it can be installed more painlessly. And so, yeah, he left 3 thoughts for the group that was there at ODVA, to remind you. And one was, he says, standards are great. They love standards. It really helps organize things and make sure from one plant to the next that things can be organized and installed. The next thing is they need new technology to deliver functionality and simplicity. Sounds almost like an Albert Einstein thing of come up with your theory or your concept as simple as possible, but not too simple. And I think that's a wise words and something that engineers are looking for. When you're the person trying to make it work on the floor, getting it installed on the floor, you don't have lots of time for esoteric engineering and configuration and so on. You need things you can hook up. And especially if you have to replace something at 3 a.m. on Sunday morning, you don't want to fiddle around with stuff. You need something you can plug in and use. And his third thing was, please keep end users in mind when you develop these technologies and standards. Standards are great. New technology to deliver functionality and simplicity is needed, and please keep end users in mind. There was a lot of work going on with ODVA, and some of the things they're working on, a lot of it is working with other people. So they have a group working and I think they titled the session I sat in like SIP, the CIP protocol to the cloud. And basically what it is mapping the data on the CIP protocol to the OPC UA information model, so that if I have plant floor data coming from a device, even a simple device or not so simple device, can be mapped to OPC UA, so it can go to the database in the cloud, wherever the cloud is, and we don't care, and then become useful for MES, ERP, CRM, supply chain, all the goodies, and then filter into, information and visualization and so on for better decisions to be made by corporate executives, division executives, plant managers, operations people, and all that sort of stuff. The end goal, aside from the one thing that needs to be done is control, but beyond control, then we need to get the information to make more and better decisions about what's going on. So that's that SIP to OPC UA was interesting. They're working on mapping to time-sensitive networking, TSN. Sounds like that's going to be really difficult. There are a lot of parts to the TSN standard from IEEE, and I've thought for about 3 or 4 years that this is really, really, really cool, but it is so complicated, it may be difficult to get the synchronization of the network from SIP's SIP sync, as they call it, to TSN and get all that working. Could be interesting. Let me look at my notes here. They're talking a lot about device drivers and so on. APL is huge, and I've already been in many interviews on APL, and I expect to be in many more. Automation ML, machine language, is interesting stuff coming in, as long as artificial intelligence got to mention. And then XDS is something they're working on that has to do with just device descriptions, and hopefully they work with FDT Group to use some of the work they've already done. The best thing is standards. When you incorporate other standards, and then we don't have to have a different standard on the same thing in half a dozen different places. So that was all well and good, and that was working along. And the ODVA meetings were really good. A lot of work going on there, and that reminds me of sort of one last thing, and that's all the volunteer work. Now, it is volunteer work, but sometimes you're volunteered by your company because the company has a vested interest in seeing success of the standard. But anyway, it's volunteer work, and it's hard work, and it's detailed work, and you have committee meetings, and you're hashing out definitions, and you're figuring out how to map this array of bits to that array of bits. And it's I've been on standards committees. I've been chairman of a standards committee in my life, and it's not easy, and it can be frustrated during the process, but when you're done and you have something out there that people can use, it's fantastic. And I guess I would motivate you to get involved with the standard, if not DeviceNet and Ethernet IP with ODVA. There are other standards, the FDD group I just mentioned, and there are other networking standards out there. There's work with the Open Process Automation Forum, OPAF, as we call it. I've written about that a number of times, looking for a way to do a virtualization layer where we can decouple hardware and software on process controllers, and process controllers could be updated without rip and replace, or without the problem getting to be when controllers are way obsolete, and then they, they're so far behind that it's harmful to the company. Yet it's just almost impossible to come up with the money and the time and everything to upgrade. And so they're trying to solve that problem. And there's a lot of work going on with OPAF, a lot of other standards work you can get involved in. It's very worthwhile. And I look for some younger people with different programming skills that may bring some new things to the table to help out that whole process. Anyway, that's a wrap up from ODVA and some thoughts on standards and simplicity and working on networking and tying things together better. This is Gary talking about Gary on manufacturing, and this podcast is sponsored by my good friends at Inductive Automation. Discover a whole new view with Ignition 8 by Inductive Automation is packed with features for the modern control system like unlimited licensing, high-powered tags, and a mobile-first flexible design environment for all devices. Ignition 8 supports enterprises of any size. See all Ignition has to offer at inductiveautomation.com. And once again, if you're looking for a good place to gather and talk about standards and what's happening in the industry, check out on my website the banner ad for the industry forum by ARC Advisory Group, or you can go to arcweb.com and check out what's happening there. Thank you. Remember, get involved in making big ideas happen, stay curious, and stay safe. It's Gary. Thank you for listening.